Vivienne, I know you're going to see this eventually. Someone is going to send it to you, or you're going to find it yourself, because you have always been the kind of person who needs to know what people are saying about you. Even when you were 7 years old, you used to press your ear against closed doors. You thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything. That is the thing about mothers, baby girl. We notice everything. We just choose most of the time, out of love, out of grace, out of the particular exhaustion of raising a human being who is simultaneously your greatest joy and your most complicated relationship. We choose to say nothing. I have been choosing to say nothing for a very long time. I am done choosing that. So yes, this is for you. And it is also for everyone watching who has ever had someone take their silence as permission, who has ever been so busy being a good mother, a gracious woman, and a person who doesn't make trouble, that they didn't notice the walls closing in until the door was already locked. Here is what I want you to know, Vivienne, before I tell this story from the beginning. I know what you told them. I know what you told the police, what you told the lawyers, what you told Aunt Renee and Cousin Bridget and the women from my church who stopped calling me after you got to them first. I know the story you built. I know how carefully you built it. And I know that when you tell it, it sounds completely believable. Because you are your mother's daughter, and your mother taught you how to speak with conviction and look people in the eye and never let them see you sweat. I taught you that. And I need you to understand something. Everything I taught you too. You filed a restraining order against me, Vivienne, your 67-year-old mother who nursed you through pneumonia 3 times before you were 10, who drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to sit with you after your first miscarriage because you called me at 2 in the morning and I was in the car before you finished the sentence, who gave you a home when your marriage fell apart, who gave you another home, my home, the last home I have, when I needed help, and you said, Mama, I'm here. Mama, I've got you. Mama, you don't have to do this alone. You filed a restraining order, and I am standing here today, in front of everyone, with nothing left to lose and nothing left to hide, to tell the truth about what happened inside that house. All of it. The part you planned, the part you didn't expect, and the part that is going to follow you for the rest of your life, whether you're ready for it or not. Because unlike you, Vivienne, I have never been afraid of the truth. It's the only thing you forgot to take from me. If you are still watching, and I think you are, because what I just said either made your jaw drop or hit so close to home you couldn't look away, I want you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment below and finish this sentence. Gloria, the truth is, finish it however you need to. Maybe it's something about your own Vivienne. Maybe it's something about a door that was locked against you. Maybe it's just, Gloria, the truth is I needed to hear this today. Whatever it is, say it. And if you believe, truly believe, that a mother deserves to be heard, that a woman's story does not end when someone tries to silence her, like this video, right now, because I have a lot more to say. And Vivienne, if you're watching, stay. You're going to want to hear this from the beginning. Let me tell you who I was before any of this happened. Not who Vivienne says I am. Not the confused, erratic, a difficult woman she described to the police officer who stood on my porch, with his hand on his belt and his eyes already decided before I opened my mouth. Not the version of me that exists in whatever story she has been telling people since she changed those locks. The real me. Gloria Annette Thibodaux, born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The second of 4 children in a family that did not have much money, but had an abundance of everything that matters more than money. Faith, noise, food on the table, and the unshakable conviction that a Thibodaux woman does not fold under pressure. My mother used to say that God made Louisiana women out of something tougher than he used for everyone else, because he knew what he was putting us up against. I believed her then. I believe her more now. I was a school teacher for 31 years. 4th grade, Baton Rouge Public Schools, the same classroom for most of those years, room 14, 2nd floor, window facing the parking lot, a view so uninspiring that I compensated by covering every inch of the walls with colour. Maps and artwork and the kind of motivational posters that teachers put up because they need to read them as much as the children do. I taught over 800 children in those 31 years. I still hear from some of them. A woman named Kezia, who is now a paediatric surgeon, sent me a card last Christmas that said I was the first person who ever made her feel smart. I kept that card. I keep all of them in a shoebox under my bed that is one of the few things from my old life that Vivienne did not manage to get her hands on. I married late, 34 years old, which in Louisiana in 1991 meant that my mother's friends had opinions and were not shy about sharing them. His name was Desmond Thibodaux. I took his name, he took my heart, those were the terms we agreed on, and neither of us ever renegotiated. Desmond was a civil engineer, a quiet man with a loud laugh and the ability to fall asleep anywhere. Car seats, waiting rooms, once in the middle of his own birthday party. That drove me absolutely crazy for 30 years, and that I would give anything to watch happen one more time. We had 2 children, Vivienne Celeste, born 1993, and her brother Theo, born 1997. I will tell you about Theo later. Right now, I want to tell you about Vivienne, because to understand what she did, you have to understand who she was before she did it. And who she really was, is more complicated than the monster you might be constructing in your mind right now. That is the hardest part of this story to tell. The part where I have to be honest about loving someone who hurt me, about seeing the beauty in a person alongside the damage, and about holding both things at once without letting either one cancel the other out. Vivienne was extraordinary. I mean that without irony, and without the complicated asterisk that everything about her carries now. She was extraordinary, brilliant, driven, magnetic, the kind of child who filled every room she entered with a particular electricity that made people turn and look without knowing why. She was reading chapter books at 5. She was organizing the other children in her class at 6. She appointing herself the unofficial social director of whatever environment she found herself in. She was, by the time she reached high school, the kind of young woman that teachers called a natural leader, and that other students called, depending on their relationship with her, either inspiring or exhausting. Desmond called her a force of nature. He said it with pride. I said it with pride too. I also said it sometimes with a weariness that I kept private, or the weariness of being the mother of a force of nature, which is a beautiful thing to witness and an occasionally overwhelming thing to be responsible for. Vivienne did everything with totality. When she loved you so completely that you felt it like weather, warm and surrounding and impossible to ignore. And when she was disappointed in you, or angry with you, or had decided for whatever reason that you were in the wrong, that too was total. That too was like weather. The other kind. I saw both sides of Vivienne more times than I can count across 30 years of motherhood. I just never expected the cold front to last this long. Desmond died in 2018. Heart attack. Sudden. The kind of death that arrives without warning and leaves without explanation, taking the person and giving nothing back but silence and a pile of logistics and the slow, grinding work of learning how to be a person without the other person who made you make sense. He was 63 years old. We had been married for 27 years. I will not spend too long on this because Desmond deserves more than a paragraph, and I have learned, in the years since he left, that grief is not something you perform for an audience. It is private and permanent and mine. What I will tell you is that his death changed the geometry of my life in ways that are still revealing themselves to me. He had been the counterweight, the steadiness to my warmth, the practicality to my sentiment, The person who sat across the dinner table and made the house feel like a home rather than just a building I slept in. Without him, the house felt very large. Vivienne called every day for the first month, then every other day, then weekly, and this is not bitterness talking, just fact. Then when it was convenient, I understood. She had her own life, her own grief, her own marriage, which was going through difficulties I was only partially aware of because Vivienne has always been selective about what she shares, and I have always respected that. She had a job she was struggling with, a city she had moved to 3 years earlier and had not quite made peace with, a life that was fraying at the edges in ways she was not yet ready to acknowledge. I understood all of it. I gave her space. That, I have come to realize, was my first mistake. Or not giving her space. That was the right thing. But giving her space without paying attention to what she was doing with it, without noticing the ways her life was quietly collapsing while I was busy being understanding and undemanding and the kind of mother who doesn't add to her child's burden. I was so focused on not being a burden that I stopped being a witness. And Vivienne needed someone to be watching. And Theo is 2 years younger than Vivienne and approximately 200% less complicated. Which I say with love because I love both of my children, and complication is not a character flaw, but it is a fact. Theo is a high school basketball coach in Shreveport. He married a woman named Dana, who makes the best bread pudding I have ever eaten, and who laughs at everything, including things that are not funny, which is somehow never annoying and always exactly right. They have twin boys, or Marcus and Miles, who are 9 years old and who call me Grandma Glow and who have the ability to make me feel, for the duration of whatever weekend I spend with them, like the most important person in any room. Theo called me every Sunday. Not every day, not every other day, but every Sunday, without fail, the way some people go to church. Noon, Baton Rouge time, regular as a sacrament. We would talk for 45 minutes to an hour about everything and nothing. His team, my students, the news, memories of Desmond, whatever was sitting at the top of our minds that week. It was not dramatic or extraordinary, it was just consistent, reliable. The weekly proof that someone in this world knew where I was and cared about the answer. I told Theo things I didn't tell Vivienne, not because I loved him more. I want to be clear about that, because this story has enough complexity without adding a dimension that isn't there. I loved them equally, which any parent will tell you means loving them differently because they are different people with different needs. But I told Theo more because Theo listened without advising, without fixing, without the particular energy that Vivienne brought to every conversation about a problem, which was the energy of a person who has already decided on the solution and is waiting impatiently for you to catch up. I told Theo when the house started to feel too big. I told Theo when I had a fall. And I told Theo when Vivienne called, 3 days after the fall, with a proposal. Theo was quiet for a moment when I told him what she had suggested, and then he said very carefully, in the way he says things when he has an opinion he is not sure he should share. Mama, what do you want to do? Not, that's a great idea. Not, I think you should. Just, what do you want to do? I told him I thought it would be good for both of us. That Vivienne needed a reset and I needed some help, and maybe this was the universe offering a solution to 2 problems at once. He said, "Okay, Mama," in a tone I recognized. A tone that meant, I love you too much to fight you on this. But I want you to remember this conversation. I remembered it. I just didn't remember it in time. The fall happened on a Wednesday morning in March of 2022. It was not a dramatic fall. It was not a fall that should have changed anything. When I stepped off the back porch to check on my garden, tomatoes, begonias, the rosemary bush that Desmond had planted the first spring we moved in, and that has survived everything since, including me. And the step, which I had been meaning to have repaired for 2 years, gave way just slightly under my right foot, and I went down sideways onto the patio. I broke my wrist, fractured 2 ribs, bruised my dignity considerably. I drove myself to urgent care. Before you say anything, yes, I know. Theo has already said everything there is to say about that decision, and I called my neighbour Patrice from the waiting room and asked her to feed my cat, and I called Theo on the way home, and I did not call Vivienne until that evening because I did not want to alarm anyone, and I knew that Vivienne, once alarmed, would not be easily unalarmed. I was right about that. She called back within 4 minutes of my voicemail. And in the conversation that followed, me in my recliner with my wrist in a brace, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent a day in pain and is trying not to show it. And Vivienne on the other end of the line with that focused, total energy of hers, she proposed something that I want to be honest about. Something that, at the time, felt like love. Something that I said yes to. Something that, looking back from where I am standing now, I understand was the beginning of the end of the life I had built. "Mama," she said, "I'm coming home." 3 words. The same 3 words I had said to her, years ago, when she called me at 2 a.m. from a hospital bathroom after her miscarriage. The same 3 words that mean, in our family, in the language that mothers and daughters build between them over decades of phone calls and front porches and everything in between. I am here. You are not alone. Whatever is happening, we face it together. She said them. I believed them. And 3 days later, Vivienne Celeste Thibodaux pulled into my driveway with 2 suitcases and a plan I knew nothing about. The first 2 weeks were wonderful. I want to say that clearly and without qualification, because the truth of this story, the full truth, not the version that makes me look wise in hindsight, is that there was a period, a real and genuine period, where having Vivienne in my home felt like exactly what I had told Theo it would be. Good for both of us. She cooked. Lord, that woman can cook. She got that from Desmond's mother, Miss Claudette, who believed that love was most honestly expressed through food, and who passed that belief directly into Vivienne's hands without stopping at her heart first. The first week Vivienne was home, she made red beans and rice on Monday the way you're supposed to in Louisiana, with smothered pork chops on Wednesday, a shrimp étouffée on Friday night that made me close my eyes when I tasted it, because it was so close to the way Desmond's mother used to make it that for just a moment I forgot what year it was. I told her it was perfect. She smiled the way she used to smile when she was a little girl, and I praised her. Wide and real and slightly surprised, like she had not quite believed the compliment was coming and was still processing the warmth of it. That smile. I have to be careful when I think about that smile because it leads me to a place I am not ready to go yet. She helped me with my exercises. The occupational therapist had given me a set of wrist-strengthening movements to do twice a day, simple things, the kind of careful, repetitive motions that feel slightly ridiculous but that I did faithfully because I am a woman who follows instructions when the instructions make sense. That Vivienne would sit across from me at the kitchen table in the mornings and do them with me. Not in a clinical way, in the easy, companionable way of someone who is simply keeping you company, making the tedious thing less tedious by being present for it. I thought, this is what I was missing. This is what the house needed. Another person in it. We watched old movies in the evenings. We went to church together on Sundays, which I had been doing alone for 4 years and which felt, with Vivienne beside me in the pew, suddenly and unexpectedly full again. We talked, really talked, the way we had not talked in years, the way that distance and busy lives and the careful management of a complicated mother-daughter relationship had prevented us from talking for longer than either of us had acknowledged. She told me about her marriage, more than she had ever told me before, about the ways it had eroded, not dramatically, not with one catastrophic event, but slowly, to the way wood rots when water gets in through a small crack and works its way through the structure over years, until one day the whole thing is soft and unreliable and beyond saving. Her husband's name was Craig. They had been married for 9 years. She had tried. She said this with a flatness that told me she had processed it past the point of grief into something more like tired acceptance. She had tried everything she knew how to try. It wasn't enough. The divorce had been finalized 4 months before she came to stay with me. I held her hand across the kitchen table when she told me, and I did not say I told you so, which I want noted for the record because I had had reservations about Craig from the beginning that I had kept almost entirely to myself, out of respect for her choices. Almost entirely. I am her mother. I am not a saint. She laughed when I said that. And for a moment, just a moment, are fragile and warm as a candle flame. We were just 2 women sitting at a kitchen table being honest with each other. No history, no weight, no 30 years of complicated love and miscommunication, and the particular tension that lives between strong women who are also deeply similar and deeply unwilling to admit it. Just honest. I thought we were healing something. We were. I just didn't understand yet what Vivienne planned to do with the healed version of me. The first sign came in week 3. I want to describe it carefully because it is important that you understand how small it was, how reasonable it seemed, how completely I would have felt like a paranoid and ungrateful woman if I had said out loud, in that moment, what I was actually feeling. Vivienne suggested we put her name on my bank account. She did not suggest it the way you might be imagining. Not directly, not with a form in her hand and a pen extended. She suggested it the way she suggested most things in those early weeks, which was sideways. In the context of something else, wrapped in practicality and care so that by the time the suggestion arrived, you had already agreed to the logic that surrounded it. We were talking about my wrist, about the fact that I was still having difficulty with certain tasks, writing, opening jars, the particular combination of grip and pressure required to use an ATM, small things, real things, and things I had been managing fine with Patrice's occasional help and my own stubbornness, but that Vivienne had been quietly noting with the focused attention she brought to everything. It would just be easier, she said, if I could handle some of the banking when you need me to. Run to the ATM, pay a bill if you're having a bad day. Just as a practical thing, while you're still healing. I looked at her. I can manage my own banking, Vivienne, I said. I know you can, Mama. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying, it would be simpler. While you're healing. While you're healing. She said that phrase a lot in those early weeks. While you're healing. It was accurate. I was healing, but there was something about the repetition of it that I noticed without being able to articulate why I noticed it. Like a word you say too many times until it starts to sound strange. Like a frame being built around a picture. I told her I would think about it. She nodded and moved on and made no further mention of it for another 2 weeks, so I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. The second sign came in week 5. This one was harder to name because it did not involve anything tangible. No forms, no requests, no suggestions. It involved something much more difficult to point to. It involved my friends. I have a group of women I have known for between 15 and 30 years. We call ourselves, with the self-aware irony of women who have been friends long enough to laugh at themselves, the Tuesday Ladies, because for years we met every Tuesday evening at whoever's house was cleanest that week to eat too much and talk too loudly and solve problems that were mostly not ours to solve. We had shifted to a monthly dinner as we got older and busier, but the foundation was solid. These were the women who had sat with me after Desmond died. Who brought food for 3 weeks straight, and who knew, without being asked, when to stay and when to leave, and when to simply sit quietly and not try to fill the silence. My closest friend among them was a woman named Bernadette, 69 years old, retired nurse, sharp as broken glass, and twice as likely to draw blood if you weren't careful. She had known me for 28 years. She had known Vivienne since Vivienne was a teenager. She was not, to put it delicately, among Vivienne's most devoted admirers, a fact that had caused minor friction between us over the years and that I had always managed by keeping the two relationships in separate compartments. Vivienne was home for about 3 weeks when Bernadette came for dinner. It was a normal evening. Or it started as one. The three of us ate together, and Vivienne was charming. She is always charming when she wants to be. That is not something I will ever dispute. And the conversation moved easily through the usual territories. After dinner, Vivienne excused herself to make a phone call, and Bernadette leaned across the table and said, very quietly, the way she says things when she is concerned, but is not yet sure if her concern is warranted. "How are you really doing, Gloria, with her here?" "I'm fine," I said. "It's been good, actually. Better than I expected." Bernadette looked at me for a moment. "Oh, she seems very organized," she said. "That's Vivienne," I said. "She's always been organized." Bernadette said. Just that. In the tone that I recognized from 30 years of friendship as the tone that meant, "I have more to say and I am deciding whether this is the moment." "What?" I said. "Nothing," she said. "I'm glad it's working out." I let it go. 3 weeks later, Bernadette called to cancel our monthly dinner, said she had a conflict, rescheduled for the following month. That month she cancelled again. We spoke on the phone, briefly, carefully, in a way that felt slightly different from our usual conversations, slightly managed, like she was measuring her words against something I couldn't see. I did not connect it to Vivienne. Not then. Not until much later, when Bernadette finally told me, in a parking lot, in whispers, looking over her shoulder in a way that I had never in 28 years seen Bernadette look over her shoulder, because Bernadette is not a woman who looks over her shoulder for anyone. What Vivienne had said to her on the phone. But I will get to that. The third sign was the one that I came closest to addressing directly. It happened on a Saturday morning in week 7. I had slept well, my wrist was feeling stronger, and I woke up with the particular lightness of a person whose body has decided, after a period of protest, to start cooperating again. I came downstairs planning to make my own coffee. A small thing, a symbolic thing, the kind of ordinary self-sufficiency that I had been slowly reclaiming and that felt, each time I managed it, like a small, quiet victory. The coffee was already made. That was not the sign. That was kindness. Vivienne had always been an early riser, and making coffee was a simple thing. The sign was the notepad on the counter. It was my notepad, the one I kept by the phone for messages and grocery lists, and the small administrative notes of daily life. And on the top page in Vivienne's handwriting was a list of my medications, dosages, times, refill dates, a list of my doctors, names, phone numbers, addresses, a list of my financial accounts. Not account numbers, she didn't have those yet, but the names of my bank, my retirement account, my insurance provider. And at the bottom, circled, the name and number of an elder law attorney. I stood at that counter for a long time. The coffee steamed in the pot beside me. I heard Vivienne moving around upstairs. And I thought, and I want to be precise about this because the thought matters. I thought, there are 2 ways to look at this list. One way is that my daughter, who came here to help me, is being thorough, is being responsible, is doing what organized, practical people do when they take on the care of a parent. They make lists, they gather information, they prepare. The other way is something I am not ready to say out loud yet. I took the notepad. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I went back downstairs and I poured my own coffee, and when Vivienne came down 20 minutes later and looked at the counter where the notepad had been, I watched her face for just a moment before she noticed me watching. What I saw there lasted less than a second. A flicker. Not surprise, not confusion, calculation. Gone before I could be certain I had seen it. Gone so fast I spent the next 3 days convincing myself I had imagined it. I had not imagined it, but I did not say anything. And in the silence of my not saying anything, Vivienne continued to build, quietly, patiently, the way you build something you intend to keep. There is a particular kind of loneliness that nobody warns you about, not the loneliness of being alone. I had learned that one after Desmond died, and I had made a kind of peace with it, the way you make peace with weather you cannot change. Not the loneliness of grief, which is loud and obvious and at least has the decency to announce itself. This was quieter than both of those. This was the loneliness of being surrounded, of having someone in your home, at your table, or in your space every single day, and feeling underneath the cooking and the conversation and the careful choreography of two women sharing a life, more alone than you have ever been, because the person beside you is not quite the person you thought they were. And you cannot say that out loud, because you have no proof, because every time you reach for the thing that is wrong, you find instead something that looks exactly like love. That is the loneliness I am talking about. That is the loneliness Vivienne built around me, one reasonable thing at a time. The banking came first, not the joint account. She had let that suggestion go quiet after I deflected it, which I had taken as a concession, and which I now understand was simply a tactical retreat, a regrouping, a recalculation of approach. What came instead was subtler. My wrist, even as it healed, continued to give me occasional difficulty, some mornings more than others. There were days when grip and pressure were manageable, and days when they were not, and Vivienne had learned, through observation, through the patient accumulation of data that I now recognize as surveillance dressed as care, exactly which days were which. On a bad day, about 2 months in, she offered to run to the bank for me. Just a simple errand, a deposit I had been meaning to make. She would take the check, fill out the slip, be back in 20 minutes. I said yes, because it was a simple errand and my wrist hurt and she was right there. She came back in 20 minutes with the receipt and a coffee from the drive-through because she had remembered without being asked exactly how I take it. That happened 3 more times over the following weeks, each time a bad wrist day, an errand, a receipt, a coffee. Each time building the precedent a little more solidly, each time making it a little more normal for Vivienne to be the one handling the transaction. And then one afternoon she came home from an errand I had not sent her on and set a form on the kitchen table in front of me. "The bank suggested it," she said, "since I've been going in for you. It just makes it official, easier for everyone." I looked at the form. Joint account authorization. Vivienne. "It's not a big deal, Mama. It's just so they don't give me trouble when I come in. It protects both of us." "I'll go in myself next time," I said. She looked at me, not angry, not hurt, something more careful than either of those things. A long, measured look that lasted just a beat too long, and that contained, I now believe, a very precise assessment of how hard to push and in which direction. "Of course," she said. She took the form back. She made dinner. She did not mention it again that evening. But the following week, a letter arrived from my bank, addressed to me, informing me that my account preferences had been updated and that a secondary account holder had been added for my convenience. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter for a very long time. When Vivienne came downstairs, I held it up. She glanced at it and said with complete calm, "Oh, I called them and explained the situation. They were very understanding. It's just a convenience thing, Mama. It doesn't change anything." "I didn't authorize that." "Vivienne, you authorized me to handle the banking," she said. "That's what this is." "That is not what that is." She sat down across from me, and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before, or perhaps I had seen it and not recognized it for what it was. Patient, gentle, slightly tilted, the way you look at someone who is confused and you are trying very hard not to make them feel bad about the confusion. "Mama," she said, "you've been having a hard time. Your wrist, the pain, the bad nights, I know you don't always tell me when you're struggling. I just want to make sure you're covered. That's all this is. I opened my mouth. And then something happened that I am not proud of and that I want to be honest about, because I think it is the most important thing in this entire story. I closed it again, not because I believed her, but because I suddenly heard myself, as if from the outside, as if I were watching this conversation rather than having it. And what I heard was a 67-year-old woman sitting at her kitchen table arguing with her daughter about a bank account, and I thought, with a flash of something that was equal parts shame and fear, what if she's right? What if I am struggling more than I know? What if the confusion I feel about this conversation is the confusion she is describing? That thought, that single, seed-sized thought, is the most dangerous thing Vivienne ever put inside me. Because she didn't plant it. She just created the conditions and let me grow it myself. Bernadette stopped coming around in month 3. I know now why. I did not know then. What I knew then was that my friend of 28 years had become suddenly, inexplicably, difficult to reach. Cancelled dinners, short phone calls, a warmth that had not disappeared but had become somehow muffled, like a voice behind a closed door, present but contained. I asked Vivienne about it once. A mistake. I think Bernadette means well, Vivienne said carefully, but I've noticed she can be a little negative around you, and I worry about the effect that has on your recovery. I stared at her. Bernadette is my oldest friend, I said. I know she is, and I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm just saying you're healing, emotionally and physically. And some relationships are more draining than others, and it might be worth thinking about what energy you want around you right now. She said it so reasonably. That was always the thing with Vivienne. The absolute, unassailable reasonableness of everything she said. Each individual sentence was defensible. Each individual concern was legitimate. It was only when you stepped back and looked at all of them together, the banking, the friends, the medications, the notepad, or the careful management of who I saw and when and for how long, that the shape of it became visible. But you had to be able to step back to see the shape. And Vivienne was very good at keeping me too close to step back. What she had actually said to Bernadette, what Bernadette told me later in that parking lot, looking over her shoulder, was this. She had called Bernadette on a Tuesday afternoon, out of nowhere, unprompted, and she had said, in the warm, concerned voice of a devoted daughter, that she was worried about her mother, that Gloria had been having some difficulties since the fall. Memory things, small things, nothing alarming, but enough that the doctors were keeping an eye on it, that she was managing it, and there was nothing for anyone to worry about, but she just wanted Bernadette to know, woman to woman, friend to friend, because if Gloria said anything that seemed confused or out of character, Bernadette shouldn't be alarmed. She was being looked after. Everything was under control. Bernadette had listened to all of this and had not said what she was thinking, which was that she had spoken to me on the phone 2 days earlier, and I had seemed, as I always seemed to Bernadette, entirely and completely myself. She had not said it because Vivienne had framed the conversation in a way that made any contradiction feel like a failure of concern, like not taking a worried daughter seriously, and like choosing to ignore warning signs out of uncomfortable friendship. So Bernadette had said thank you for letting me know. And then she had started keeping her distance, not because she believed Vivienne, but because she did not know what to believe. And in the uncertainty, she did what people do. She pulled back. She waited. She watched from a distance to see what was true, which is exactly what Vivienne needed her to do. The Tuesday ladies heard a version of the same story. My sister Renee, Ma, who lived in New Orleans and called every 2 weeks, heard a version of it. My neighbour Patrice, sweet, well-meaning Patrice, who had fed my cat and driven me to urgent care and who I had known for 11 years, heard a version of it, delivered over the fence one afternoon while I was inside, in the careful, confiding tone of a daughter who hates to say what she is about to say. I did not know about any of these conversations while they were happening. I only knew their effects. The subtle shift in how people spoke to me, the way Patrice started talking to me a little more slowly, a little more carefully, as if she were making sure I was following along. The way my sister Renee asked twice in one phone call whether I was remembering to take my medications, which she had never asked before in her life. The way the Tuesday ladies were warm and present when we were together, but somehow less likely to call spontaneously, less likely to share the sharp, Han-filtered confidences of long friendship, more likely to speak to me in the slightly elevated register of people who have been told, by someone they trust, to be careful. My world was getting smaller, and the walls were made of concern. The retirement account was month 4. I will not walk you through the same slow choreography because by now you understand how Vivienne worked, and the steps were the same. The reasonableness, the practicality, or the careful seeding of a situation over several weeks until the solution she had always intended felt, by the time it arrived, like the obvious answer to a problem she had made sure I was aware of. What I will tell you is what I found. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Vivienne had suggested, reasonably, practically, with my best interests at heart, that we speak with a financial advisor together, just to make sure everything was properly organized for my future, I found a folder. It was in the drawer of the small desk in the corner of the living room where I kept household files. My drawer. My desk. A drawer that Vivienne had no reason to be in. The folder had my name on it. Inside it was a printed summary of my retirement account balance, my social security information, a document I did not immediately recognize that turned out when I looked at it carefully to be a transfer of beneficiary form, already filled out, in Vivienne's handwriting, with Vivienne's name. I sat at that desk for a long time. My hands were not shaking. I want you to know that. I want you to understand that by this point something had happened inside me that was past the shaking stage, past the disbelief stage, into something colder and more focused and more dangerous to Vivienne than anything that had come before. I was paying attention, fully, finally, with the particular clarity of a woman who has stopped explaining away what she sees and has started simply seeing it. And I took the folder. I put it with the notepad in the drawer of my nightstand. I picked up my phone, and I called Theo. Theo answered on the first ring. I had not told him everything that had been happening. I had told him small pieces, the banking, the cancelled visits from Bernadette. But I had minimized them the way you minimize things when you are not ready to say the large, true thing they add up to. The way you minimize things when saying them out loud would make them real in a way you are not yet prepared for. I did not minimize anything this time. I told him about the notepad, the bank account letter, the conversations with Bernadette and Patrice and the Tuesday ladies, the folder in the desk, the beneficiary form with Vivienne's name, already filled in Vivienne's handwriting. Theo was quiet for a long time when I finished. Longer than usual, and then he said very carefully, very precisely in the voice that Desmond used to use when something had made him angry, but he was choosing to respond from his head rather than his gut. "Mama, I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening," I said. "I need you to not tell Vivienne we had this conversation." "Okay. I need you to make copies of everything in that nightstand drawer and get them out of the house. Give them to Patrice or mail them to me or both. Today, if you can." "Theo." "And I need you to call a lawyer, Mama, not the one Vivienne circled on that notepad. Your own lawyer. Someone she doesn't know and hasn't spoken to. Can you do that?" I looked out the window at my backyard, at the rosemary bush Desmond had planted, at the back porch step that had started all of this, now repaired. Vivienne had called a handyman to fix it in week 2, a gesture I had received as love, I received it differently now. Yes, I said. Good, Theo said. And then, quietly, with the specific weight of a son who has been worried for longer than he has been saying. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner, Mama. You said something, I told him, when it mattered. I made the copies that afternoon while Vivienne was out. I gave them to Patrice over the fence in an envelope with Theo's address on a sticky note inside and asked her to mail them without asking me any questions. Patrice, to her eternal credit, asked no questions. And she mailed them that day. And I went back inside and I made dinner and I sat across the table from my daughter and I smiled when she told me about her day and I said nothing. Nothing. Because I had learned, finally, the lesson that Vivienne had been relying on me not to learn. Silence has power. Only if you are the one choosing it. The move came on a Tuesday. I remember the day specifically because Tuesday had always been the Tuesday Ladies' Day. The day that for years had meant women and food and laughter and the particular comfort of being known. And because it was a Tuesday, I had spent alone, which had become the norm by that point, which was itself a thing I had been sitting with in the careful, quiet way I had been sitting with everything since my conversation with Theo. I had spent the morning doing what I had been doing every morning for 3 weeks. Watching. Not, obviously. Not in a way Vivienne would notice. But with the specific focused attention of a woman who has finally taken off the glasses she didn't know she was wearing and is seeing her own home clearly for the first time in months. I watched the phone calls Vivienne took in the other room, voice low, door half closed. I watched the way she managed the mail, bringing it in herself, sorting it on the kitchen counter, handing me what she decided I should have. I watched the way she positioned herself between me and anyone who came to the door, the way a person positions themselves between something they are guarding and something they are guarding it from. I watched. And I documented. Theo had told me to document everything and I had taken that instruction with the same seriousness I had taken everything Theo said since the phone call. Which was to say completely. I had a notebook. Not the one Vivienne knew about. A new one. Too small enough to fit in the inside pocket of my housecoat that I wrote in every evening after Vivienne went to bed. Dates, times, observations. The mail she had sorted. The phone calls she had redirected. The account statement that had arrived addressed to both of us, that I had retrieved from the recycling bin after Vivienne had placed it there, apparently having decided I did not need to see it. I had also, quietly and without announcement, called a lawyer. Her name was Adrienne Moss. She had been recommended by the pastor of my church, not through Vivienne, not through anyone Vivienne had access to, but through a conversation I had at church on a Sunday morning while Vivienne was in the bathroom, leaning close to Pastor Williams and speaking in a voice too low to carry, and asking for the name of someone trustworthy and discreet. Pastor Williams, God bless him, had not asked a single question. He had written a name and number on the back of a tithing envelope and pressed it into my hand. I had called Adrienne Moss from the parking lot of a grocery store the following Wednesday, while Vivienne thought I was buying orange juice. Adrienne Moss was 60 years old, had been practicing elder law in Baton Rouge for 25 years, and had a voice like river water, smooth and steady and moving in one direction, regardless of what it encountered, as she listened to everything I told her without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the calm certainty of someone who has heard this story before and knows exactly what it is, Mrs. Thibodaux, what your daughter is doing has a name. It is called elder financial abuse and elder isolation. It is a crime in Louisiana. And I want you to understand something very clearly before we go any further. Go ahead, I said. You are not confused. You are not overreacting. And you are not crazy. What you are describing is a pattern I have seen many times in this office, and it is real, and it is serious, and you were right to call me. I sat in that parking lot for a moment, and I felt something I had not felt in months. Solid ground. What do? I said. First, she said, We make sure everything you have is protected. Then we talk about next steps. I want to tell you that the next steps happened quickly. I want to tell you that having a lawyer and a plan and Theo on the phone and the documentation in my notebook meant that what came next was something I was ready for. I was not ready for it. Nobody is ever ready for it, because what came next was not Vivienne making a legal move or a financial move or any of the moves I had been preparing for. What came next was Vivienne calling the police. It was a Thursday evening. We had eaten dinner together, quietly. The particular quiet of two people who are performing normalcy for an audience of each other. Both of us by that point aware, I think, that something had shifted between us without either of us having named it directly. The food was good. The conversation was surface level. We had become, over the preceding weeks, very skilled at surface level. After dinner, I went to my room. I wrote in my notebook. I called Theo briefly, 15 minutes, careful, quiet, and the door closed, and when I came out of my room an hour later to get a glass of water from the kitchen, I found Vivienne sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand and an expression on her face that I had not seen there before. Not calculating, not managed, cornered. "We need to talk," she said. I poured my water. I sat down across from her, and she told me that she knew I had been to see a lawyer. I do not know how she found out. I have asked myself this many times, and I have a theory that involves a phone bill and a number she did not recognize and the particular thoroughness of a person who checks everything. But I do not know for certain, and perhaps it does not matter. What matters is that she knew. And knowing had accelerated something in her. The conversation that followed was the most surreal of my life, not because it was dramatic, not because there was screaming or accusations or the kind of confrontation you might expect between a mother and a daughter at the breaking point of something this large and this painful. It was surreal because it was the opposite of all of that. It was calm, almost eerily calm. Vivienne spoke in a measured, sorrowful voice, the voice of someone who has been grievously wronged and is trying very hard to be adult about it. And she said things that were so far from the reality I had been living that for a moment. Just the briefest vertigo of a moment. I questioned myself. She said I had become paranoid. She said the fall had affected me more than I realized. She said she had been covering for me with my friends, with my family, with my doctors, because she loved me and didn't want anyone to worry, but that she was scared. That she had been scared for months, that she had been documenting things about that word documenting, the same word Theo had used, landing very differently in her mouth. Documenting my confusion, my erratic behavior, my irrational suspicion of people who were trying to help me. I looked at her. "Vivienne," I said, "what are you doing?" She looked back at me. And just for a second, less than a second, just the briefest window before the mask came back down, I saw it. Not remorse, not guilt, calculation. She had made a decision. "I'm trying to take care of you, Mama," she said. I stood up. I went back to my room. I locked my door. And I called Adrienne Moss, and I told her what had just happened, and Adrienne said, in that steady river voice of hers, "Gloria, I need you to be very careful in the next few days. Do you have somewhere you can stay if you need to leave the house quickly?" "Theo is 4 hours away," I said. "Is there someone closer?" I thought about Bernadette. "Maybe," I said. "Think about it," Adrienne said, "and call me tomorrow morning." The police came 2 days later. 2 days of careful surface-level normalcy between Vivienne and me. 2 days of meals eaten and pleasantries exchanged, and the house holding its breath around us. 2 days during which I moved certain things, my important documents, Raymond's letter, my medication, my notebook, to my car. Quietly, in stages. And with the methodical calm of a woman who has done her grieving and her fearing and is now simply doing what needs to be done. On Saturday morning I was in the backyard, standing at Desmond's rosemary bush, just standing there with my coffee, the way I had done 1,000 mornings before any of this started. The morning was cool and clear, and the rosemary smelled the way it always smells, sharp and green and like something that has survived longer than it had any right to. I heard the front doorbell. I heard voices. And then I heard Vivienne's voice. Elevated, distressed, the particular pitch of a performance calibrated for an audience, saying things I could not fully make out from the backyard but whose tone I understood immediately. I walked around to the front of the house, 2 police officers on my porch, Vivienne standing in my doorway, crying. Real tears. I will give her that. Whatever else I have taken from my assessment of my daughter's character, and I will give her that she can cry on command in a way that is genuinely impressive and deeply terrifying. She was telling the officers that she was scared, that her mother, her elderly mother recovering from a fall, showing signs of cognitive decline, had become threatening, that she feared for her safety, that she had been managing the situation alone for months because she didn't want to involve anyone, but it had escalated, and she didn't know what else to do. She looked up and saw me coming around the corner of the house, and she flinched, a perfect, practiced, utterly convincing flinch. The officers turned, and I stood in my own front yard, in my housecoat, holding my coffee cup, and watched 2 strangers look at me the way Vivienne had spent months preparing them to look at me. With caution, with assessment, with the particular careful attention of people who have been told, before they arrived, what kind of person they were coming to deal with. Ma'am, one of them said. Calm, professional, the voice of someone managing a situation. Can you tell me your name? I looked at him. I looked at Vivienne. And I said, very clearly, very steadily, in the voice of a woman who has been a schoolteacher for 31 years and who knows how to command a room. My name is Gloria Thibodaux. This is my house. I have owned it for 22 years, and I would like to know on what basis you are standing on my porch. The officer blinked, just slightly. I do not think he had been expecting that. Vivienne made a sound, soft, sorrowful, the sound of a daughter witnessing something painful, and said, Mama, please don't do this. Don't do what? I said. Identify myself in my own home. What happened next took 3 hours and involved 2 more officers, a phone call to Adrian Moss that I made from my car while one of the first officers stood nearby, and a conversation I had in my driveway with a female officer named Sergeant Doucette, who had the particular quality of someone who has been in this job long enough to understand that the first story she hears is rarely the whole story. Sergeant Doucette asked me questions, real questions, not the managed leading questions of someone who has already decided, actual questions with actual listening happening behind them. She asked about the house, about my medical history, about the lawyer I had retained, about the documents I had in my car. I showed her the documents. I showed her the notebook. I showed her the beneficiary form with Vivienne's handwriting. Sergeant Doucette looked at these things for a long time. And then she looked at me. And then she looked at the house. And then she said, very carefully, Mrs. Thibodaux, I can't make any determinations today. But I want you to make sure your lawyer knows about this conversation, and I want you to know that what you've shown me is going to be relevant. I thanked her. I sat in my car. I called Adrian, and Adrian told me that Vivienne had filed the restraining order that morning, before the police even arrived. She had filed it that morning before the police came, before the confrontation, before any of it. She had filed it as the opening move, not the response. She had constructed the entire scene on my front porch, not because something had happened, but to create evidence of something happening, to make the story real by performing it in front of witnesses. I sat with that for a moment. The restraining order meant I could not return to my home, the home I had painted sage green and hung the wind chime on, and grown tomatoes in and raised children in and grieved my husband in. The home that had Desmond's rosemary in the backyard, and my notepad with its terrible list in the nightstand, and 22 years of my life soaked into every wall and floorboard. I could not go back. Not yet. Not until Adrienne did what Adrienne was going to do. I drove to Bernadette's house. I had not called ahead. And I pulled into her driveway and I sat there for a moment, and then Bernadette's front door opened. She must have seen my car from the window. And she came down her porch steps and she opened my car door and she looked at my face and she did not ask a single question. She just said, "Come inside, Gloria." And I did. And I sat at her kitchen table and she made coffee and she sat across from me and I told her everything. All of it. From the notepad to the bank letter to the beneficiary form to the officers on my porch to the restraining order filed before any of it happened. Bernadette listened to all of it without saying a word. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, with the flat, "Our precise fury of a woman who has been a nurse for 35 years and who has seen what people do to vulnerable people and who has absolutely no patience left for any of it. That child has made a serious mistake." "Yes," I said, "because she forgot one thing." "What's that?" Bernadette looked at me. "She forgot who your friends are." I slept in Bernadette's guest bedroom that night. The room smelled like lavender and old paperbacks, and the particular cleanness of a home that is cared for by someone who believes that order is a form of self-respect. There was a quilt on the bed that Bernadette had told me once her grandmother made, navy and cream hand-stitched, the kind of thing that has absorbed so much history it feels heavier than its actual weight. I lay under it in the dark and I stared at the ceiling and I did not sleep for a long time. I thought about my house, not the legal situation, not the restraining order, not the beneficiary form, not the carefully constructed narrative Vivienne had been building around me for months. I thought about the physical house, the way the kitchen smelled in the morning when the coffee was brewing. The sound the third stair made, a particular creak, low and familiar, that I had been meaning to fix for years, and that I had secretly stopped wanting to fix because it was one of the sounds that meant home to me. The light in the living room in the late afternoon when the sun came through the west window and turned everything amber and warm and still. I thought about Desmond's rosemary, whether Vivienne would water it, whether she even knew it needed watering. At some point, somewhere in the space between that thought and the next one, I fell asleep. Theo arrived the next morning, not 4 hours after I called him, not the following day. The next morning, 7:30, Bernadette's driveway, on his truck still making the ticking sound of an engine that has been driven hard and fast and hasn't quite cooled down yet. He knocked on Bernadette's door and when I opened it, he looked at me for a moment. Just a moment. The way he had looked at me his whole life when he was assessing whether I was truly all right or whether I was performing all right for his benefit. And then he hugged me. Not a greeting hug. The other kind. The kind that says, "I know what happened and I am sorry and I am here and none of the rest of it matters right now." I let him hold on for longer than I usually would. Then I stepped back and looked at him and said, "We have a lot to do." He nodded. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. We sat at Bernadette's kitchen table, the three of us. Because Bernadette was not a woman who absented herself from important conversations happening in her own kitchen. And I told Theo everything I had told Bernadette the night before, and Bernadette filled in the pieces she had been carrying since Vivienne's phone call months earlier, the call about my supposed cognitive decline, the careful poisoning of the well. Theo listened to all of it with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set and his eyes steady. When we finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "She called me too." I looked at him. 3 months ago, he said. Said she was worried about you. Said you'd been confused, saying things that didn't make sense, getting angry about small things. Said she was handling it but wanted me to know in case I noticed anything on our Sunday calls. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said you seemed fine to me." He paused. "No, she said that was because you were good at hiding it." The table was quiet. "I should have told you," he said. "I thought about it. I didn't want to worry you with something that might be nothing. I convinced myself I was protecting you." He looked at me. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Mama. You're here now? I said. I'm here now, he said. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. And then he said, very calmly, very precisely, well, now let's talk about what we're going to do to my sister. Adrienne Moss met us at her office at 10 o'clock that morning. She had cleared her schedule. I want to pause here and tell you something about Adrienne Moss because she deserves more than a passing mention in this story. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall. All with natural hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain, and the particular quality of someone who has spent decades in a room where people underestimate her and has long since stopped finding it either surprising or interesting. She had a framed quote on the wall of her office. Just one, no motivational posters, no diplomas on display, just one small framed piece of paper in the corner that said, and in plain type, the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. I read that quote while Adrienne was reviewing my documents. I read it 3 times. She looked up from the beneficiary form, Vivienne's handwriting, Vivienne's name, and she set it down on her desk with the careful deliberateness of someone placing a piece of evidence rather than a piece of paper. Okay, she said, here is where we are. She explained it clearly, and without softening, with the way she had explained everything since our first phone call. The restraining order was temporary, filed unilaterally, based entirely on Vivienne's account, without any hearing or any opportunity for me to respond. That was normal for emergency restraining orders. What was also normal was that a hearing would be scheduled, usually within 2 to 3 weeks, at which point I would have the opportunity to present my side. That hearing, Adrienne said, is everything. That is where this turns. What do we need? Theo asked. What your mother already has, Adrienne said. She touched the notebook, the beneficiary form, the bank letter, the copies of the account documents. This is a strong foundation, but we need more. We need testimony. We need people who can speak to Gloria's cognitive state, her doctor, people who have interacted with her regularly over the past year. Her doctor has known her for 15 years, Theo said. Good. We'll need a statement. Adrienne looked at me. I also want to talk to your neighbour, Patrice. She mailed the copies, I said. Adrienne nodded. She's a witness to the documents existing. That matters. She paused. And I want to talk to Sergeant Doucette. I looked up. She listened, I said. I know, Adrienne said. She called me this morning. The room was quiet for a moment. She called you? I said. She did. Adrienne's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, very slightly in the direction of something that, on a less composed face, might have been satisfaction. She had some observations about yesterday's scene that she wanted to share, off the record for now, but she's watching. I thought about Sergeant Doucette in my driveway, looking at my documents, looking at the house, that long, careful look. I thought about the way she had said, what you've shown me is going to be relevant. She had not been making conversation. She had been making a promise. The next 2 weeks were the hardest I had experienced since the weeks after Desmond died. Not because of the practical work. The practical work was almost a relief. The way hard, purposeful labour is always a relief when the alternative is sitting still with your fear. Adrienne filed the response to the restraining order. Theo drove back to Shreveport, got his affairs in order, and came back 4 days later with a bag and Dana, who brought a container of bread pudding and the information that she had arranged childcare for the twins for as long as necessary, and that she was not leaving until this was resolved. I cried when Dana said that. I am not ashamed of it. What was hard was the waiting. The knowledge that Vivienne was in my house, with my things, with Desmond's rosemary in the backyard, living the life she had constructed while I was at Bernadette's, moving between the guest bedroom and the kitchen and the small routines of borrowed domesticity. Getting my mail forwarded, continuing to work with Adrienne and preparing for the hearing, calling my doctor, my bank, the retirement account provider. everyone who needed to be called and informed and protected. And thinking about Vivienne. I thought about her constantly during those 2 weeks in a way I could not have anticipated, and that I am going to try to describe honestly because I think it matters. I was not thinking about her with rage. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect, when they hear a story like this, that the wronged party is sustained by anger, that the injustice of what has been done to you becomes the fuel that powers the fight. And perhaps for some people that is true. But for me, for Gloria Thibodaux, who has been trying her whole life to see people clearly rather than conveniently, it was more complicated than that. I thought about Vivienne's divorce, about the 9 years of a marriage eroding like wood with water in the crack, about the way she had sat at my kitchen table in those early weeks and told me things she had never told me before, and how real that had felt, how the vulnerability of it had felt real, how the pain of it had felt real. Because I think it was. I think Vivienne came to my home broken in ways I did not fully understand. I think the divorce had done something to her that she had not been able to name or process or survive with her sense of herself intact. I think she had looked at her life, at 49 years old, divorced, financially unstable, the sense of control she had always relied on having slipped through her fingers. And she had looked at my life and seen something she needed. Not just the money, the solidity, the house, the routine, the belonging somewhere, the being the person in charge of something. I do not say this to excuse what she did. There is no excusing what she did. I say it because understanding why is the only way I have found to carry this without letting it crush me. Understanding that the thing Vivienne wanted most, the thing she was willing to dismantle my life to get, was the very thing I had been trying to give her freely for 30 years. A home, a place to belong, a mother who was there. She took it instead of receiving it. And that difference, between taking and receiving, between what she did and what I had always been willing to offer, is the saddest thing in this whole story. Sadder than the locks, sadder than the restraining order, sadder even than standing on my own front porch with nowhere to go. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Adrienne had prepared me with the thoroughness of someone who believes that the best outcomes come from the best preparation, and who therefore prepares as if the outcome is not yet determined, which is the only way to prepare, and which I appreciated more than I can say. She had told me what to expect, what Vivienne's lawyer would argue, how the judge would run the proceeding, what I should and should not say and how to say it, and when to let Adrienne speak for me, and when my own voice would matter more than hers. She had told me to dress the way I dressed for church. I wore a navy blue dress that Desmond had always liked, low-heeled shoes, my good earrings, pearl drops, a birthday gift from 30 years ago that I wear only on days when I need to feel like myself. I did my hair the way I always do my hair. I did my makeup the way I always do my makeup. I looked, or in the mirror that morning in Bernadette's bathroom, like Gloria Thibodaux. Not the confused, erratic, declining woman Vivienne had been describing. Not a cautionary tale. Not a victim waiting for a verdict. Gloria Thibodaux, retired schoolteacher, widow, mother, woman made out of something tougher. I held on to that reflection all the way to the courthouse. Vivienne was already in the courtroom when we arrived. She was sitting with her lawyer, a man named Prentice, expensive suit. The practiced confidence of someone who has argued these cases before and considers them manageable. And she was dressed carefully, the way she always dressed carefully, in a soft grey that read as muted and unthreatening and quietly suffering. She looked up when I walked in. Our eyes met, and I thought about the first morning I had come downstairs after her arrival and found the coffee already made and felt, in that small domestic kindness, the warmth of being looked after. I thought about how far we were from that morning. I sat down beside Adrienne and I did not look at Vivienne again. Prentice presented Vivienne's case first. He was good. I will give him that, the same way I give Vivienne her real tears. He was genuinely skilled at what he did, and what he did was construct a narrative. The narrative of a devoted daughter who had upended her own life to care for an ailing mother, who had managed a difficult situation alone, without support, for months, who had observed concerning behavior, confusion, paranoia, irrational accusations, and who had, reluctantly and with great personal anguish, taken the only step available to her to protect herself and ensure her mother received appropriate care. He used the word care 17 times. I counted. Each time he used it, I wrote a small mark in the margin of my notepad because I needed something to do with my hands that was not gripping the edge of the table. When it was Adrienne's turn, she stood up, and she did something I had not expected. She did not argue. She did not counter narrative with narrative or emotion with emotion. She presented documents, one by one, quietly, methodically, with the calm authority of someone who does not need to raise her voice because the evidence is doing all the necessary work. The bank letter, the beneficiary form, the notebook with its dated entries, the testimony of Dr. Patricia Fontenot, my physician of 15 years, stating clearly and on record that she had seen me recently, had administered cognitive assessments at my request, and had found no evidence of the decline Vivienne had been describing. The statement from Patrice about the envelope, the copies, the timeline. The statement from Bernadette about the phone call she had received. The careful, concerned, utterly fabricated account of my supposed confusion that Vivienne had used to begin the isolation. And then Adrienne called Sergeant Doucette, who had, in the 2 weeks since the morning on my porch, done some things of her own. Sergeant Doucette testified calmly and precisely, and without editorializing. She described what she had observed on my porch, Vivienne's presentation, my presentation, the documents I had shown her in the driveway. She described the timeline she had established, with the help of the court filing records, one showing that the restraining order had been filed at 9:17 in the morning. The police had been called at 11:45. The restraining order existed before the incident it was supposedly a response to, by 2 hours and 28 minutes. The courtroom was quiet when she said that. Not dramatically quiet, not the quiet of a movie moment. Just the particular stillness of a room in which something true has been said and everyone present is adjusting to the shape of it. I looked at the judge. He was writing something. I looked at Prentice. He was very still. I looked at Vivienne. She was looking at the table. The judge dismissed the restraining order that afternoon. He did it without fanfare and without a speech, which I respected. He was a practical man doing a practical job, and the documents had done what documents do when they are true. They had spoken for themselves in a language that required no interpretation. He also referred the matter to the district attorney's office, not a guarantee of anything. Adrienne had been clear about that. A referral was not a charge was not a conviction, and the road between this courtroom and any meaningful legal consequence for Vivienne was long and uncertain and full of variables neither of us could control. But it was a referral. It was the system looking at what had been done to me and saying, "This warrants attention." I sat in that courtroom after the judge left, and I let Theo hold my hand, and I let Adrienne gather her papers, and I let Bernadette, who had sat in the gallery through the entire proceedings with the focused stillness of a woman standing guard, come through the little gate and put her arm around my shoulders. I let all of it happen around me, and I thought about the wind chime, the copper bells on my porch, the sound like a question being asked and answered at the same time. I was going home. I did not go home that evening. I know that might surprise you. The restraining order had been dismissed. The house was legally, unambiguously mine. There was nothing stopping me from driving straight from the courthouse to my front door and walking back into my own life. But I did not go that evening, partly because Adrienne advised me to wait until she had formally notified Vivienne's lawyer and given Vivienne a window to vacate. a practical consideration, a legal consideration, all the kind of measured step that keeps a clean situation from becoming a complicated one. And partly because I was not ready, not because I was afraid, because I understood sitting in that courthouse parking lot with Theo beside me and Bernadette's car idling ahead of us, that walking back through that door was going to require something from me that I had not yet fully assembled, that the house I was returning to was not going to be the same house I had left, not physically, though I did not know yet what Vivienne had changed and what she had left alone, but in the way that all spaces are changed by what has happened inside them. The house where Desmond and I had raised children was one thing. The house where my daughter had spent months quietly dismantling my life was something else. The same walls, the same floors, the same west window with the amber afternoon light. But a different history, living inside it now. I needed a night to prepare myself for that. So I went back to Bernadette's, and Dana made dinner, and Theo sat across from me and talked about his boys, Marcus and Miles, their basketball games, the argument they had had last week about which of them was taller. And I listened, and I ate, and I let the ordinary warmth of it sit around me like something I had been cold without for too long. Vivienne was gone when I arrived the next morning. She had taken her 2 suitcases and whatever else she had brought or acquired in the months she had been there, and she had left. No note, no message through Adrienne, nothing. Just gone. The way she had arrived, actually. With a plan I knew nothing about. I stood in my doorway for a moment before I went in. I looked at the new lock. Adrienne had arranged for a locksmith to come that afternoon. A formality, a security measure, the practical closing of a practical vulnerability. Or but standing there looking at it, at the hardware Vivienne had installed in my door as if the changing of a lock was a thing you could do to another person's life and it would simply hold. I felt something I had not expected to feel. Tired, not defeated, not broken, just the specific bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who has been fighting for a very long time and has won and is only now allowing herself to feel how much the winning cost. I walked inside. The house smelled different. Vivienne's perfume in the air, something expensive, something she had always worn that I had always associated with her, and that now sat in my living room like a presence that had not yet gotten the message it was no longer welcome. The dark grey curtains in the living room that she had replaced my cream ones with, a throw pillow on my sofa that I did not recognise, a set of kitchen canisters on the counter, sleek and modern, and that had replaced the hand-painted ceramic ones I had bought at a craft fair in 2003 that had sat in the same spot for 20 years. Small things, the kind of small things that are easy to explain individually and that together add up to the quiet, persistent message that the person who lived here was not quite you. I walked through each room. I was looking for the large things, the documents, the financial records, anything that should have been there and wasn't. My Adrienne had told me what to check, and I checked methodically, room by room with the notebook in my hand. The important things were intact. My documents, the originals, the ones I had not managed to move to my car in time, were still in the filing cabinet where they belonged. Whether Vivienne had photographed them or copied them, I could not know, and Adrienne had told me to assume she had, and to act accordingly. My jewellery was untouched. The shoebox under my bed with the cards from my former students, Kezia's Christmas card on top, undisturbed. Desmond's rosemary was still in the backyard, a little dry, needing water. I stood at the kitchen window looking at it for a moment, and then I went to the cabinet under the sink where I had always kept the watering can, and I found it exactly where I had left it, and I filled it at the sink, and I went out the back door and I watered Desmond's rosemary. The step held. The one Vivienne had fixed. I stood on it for a moment, testing it with my weight, and it held solid and steady, and I thought, with the complicated grace of a woman trying to be fair even now, that she had fixed my step. She had cooked good food and sat with me through my exercises and fixed my step, and some of what had happened between us in those early weeks had been real. I believed that then. I believe it now. It does not change what came after. But it is part of the truth, and I am committed to the whole truth, not just the parts that make the story simpler. I went back inside. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, and for the first time in longer than I could precisely account for, I sat in my own home, at my own table, drinking my own coffee, in a silence that belonged entirely to me. It was the best coffee I had ever tasted. The legal aftermath was long and non-linear in the way that legal things always are. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into the financial exploitation charges, the beneficiary form, the unauthorized account changes, the pattern of conduct that Adrienne had documented and presented. These things moved slowly. They moved with the grinding patience of institutions that are not built for speed but for thoroughness. And I had to make peace with that pace because the alternative was spending every day in a state of waiting that would have consumed me. But Adrienne filed a civil suit on my behalf. This was separate from the criminal investigation, a civil action for financial exploitation, elder abuse, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil suit gave us more control over the timeline and the process, and while it was not a guaranteed outcome, it was a statement. A formal legal, on-the-record statement that what had been done to me had a name and a cost, and that I intended for that cost to be reckoned with. Our Vivienne retained Prentice for the civil case. Of course she did. The case was ongoing at the time I am telling you this story. I cannot tell you the outcome because the outcome has not yet been determined. What I can tell you is that Adrienne Moss is a woman who prepares as if the outcome is not yet determined. And I have chosen to understand that as the gift it is, rather than the uncertainty it also is. What I can tell you about is Theo, who did not go back to Shreveport for 3 weeks after the hearing, who drove me to every appointment, sat in every meeting, ate at my kitchen table more evenings than I can count, and talked about his boys and his team and the small ordinary beauties of his life with the specific generosity of a person who understands that ordinary beauty is exactly what someone needs after an extended period of extraordinary pain. Who called me every Sunday at noon, regular as a sacrament. Her who had called me every Sunday at noon for years and whom I had sometimes, in the fullness of my life, rushed off the phone to get to the next thing. I did not rush off the phone anymore. What I can tell you about is Bernadette, who had been kept at a distance by a story she had not known was false and who had the grace, the genuine, rare, difficult grace, not to punish herself for believing it. Who came back to my life not with apology but with presence, which is always the more valuable of the two, who sat across from me at the Tuesday ladies' dinner the first month I was back and said nothing about what had happened, and everything about what was happening now, and who, when the evening was over and we were standing in the parking lot saying goodnight, hugged me and said quietly, "I should have trusted what I knew." "You came when it mattered," I told her. "I'm not leaving again," she said. She hasn't. What I can tell you about is Patrice, who had mailed an envelope without asking questions and who, when I came home and knocked on her door to thank her, opened it immediately as if she had been expecting me and said, "I watered your plants while you were gone. The rosemary needed it." I could have cried. I chose to laugh instead. We stood on her porch and laughed about rosemary for longer than rosemary reasonably warrants, and it was one of the better moments of that entire year. And Vivienne. I have to tell you about Vivienne. Not the legal Vivienne, the ongoing civil case, the investigation, the things still moving through their slow institutional channels. I have told you what I know about that, and I have told you honestly what I don't. I mean the Vivienne I think about, the one I carry. She has not contacted me since the hearing, not directly. Adrienne receives correspondence from Prentice about the case, and I receive the information I need to receive through that channel. But from Vivienne herself, no calls, no letters, nothing. The silence she has chosen is complete, and I have not broken it, and I do not know if I will. Theo speaks to her occasionally, Not often, not warmly, but occasionally with the specific determination of a man who has decided that the severance of a sibling relationship is a grief he will carry, but a decision he will not make without exhausting every other option first. And he does not tell me the details of these conversations, and I do not ask, because we have made a quiet agreement about what I need to know and what I do not, and I trust him to honor it. What Theo has told me is this, that Vivienne is not well, not in the cognitive, declining way she described me, but in the way of a person who has done something that cannot be undone and is now living inside the consequences of it. The divorce, the estrangement, the legal case, but the loss of the very thing she had tried to take. All of it landing on a woman who had already been carrying more than she could manage before any of this started. I sit with that. I have not made peace with it. I am not sure I am supposed to. But I sit with it the way I sit with all the complicated things in this story. Not trying to resolve them into something cleaner than they are, but holding them as they are. Painful and true. And mine. There are people who have asked me, since I started telling this story, since word got around the way word gets around in a city like Baton Rouge, where everyone knows someone who knows you, whether I feel sorry for Vivienne. I never know quite how to answer that, so I will answer it here, honestly, for the first time. Yes. I feel sorry for the version of Vivienne that came to my door with 2 suitcases and a broken marriage and sat at my kitchen table and cried. I feel sorry for the child she was, and the woman she became, and the distance between those 2 things. I feel sorry for whatever happened inside her, whatever wound, whatever fear, whatever accumulated damage of a life that had not gone the way she planned. That made her look at her mother's home and see a solution rather than a sanctuary. I feel sorry for all of that, and I also know are with the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who has spent the past year looking directly at hard truths. That sorry is not the same as forgiven. That understanding is not the same as excused. That a mother's love is not the same as a mother's surrender. I loved Vivienne. I love her still, in the complicated, diminished, grief-stained way that you love someone who has become someone you do not fully recognize. But I am not going to pretend that love is bigger than what happened. I am 67 years old. I have buried a husband. I have survived a stroke of a different kind. Not the medical kind, but the kind that happens when someone takes everything you have built and tries to make it theirs. And I am still here, in my house, with my coffee and my rosemary and my wind chime on the porch making it sound like a question being asked and answered. The answer, every time I hear it, is the same. Still here, still standing, still Gloria, Vivienne. Or if you are watching this, and I believe you are, because you have always needed to know what people are saying about you, and because some part of you, the part I raised, the part that is still in there underneath everything that happened, that part knows I have only ever told the truth. I want to say one thing to you directly before I close. I did not tell this story to destroy you. I told it because silence was the first thing you took from me. Before the bank account, before the beneficiary form, before the locks, you took my voice. You took my credibility. You took the version of me that the people in my life had known for decades, and you replaced it, carefully and quietly, with a version that needed managing. A version that couldn't be trusted. A version that was lucky to have you. I am taking my voice back. That is all this is. And if there is any part of you that is capable of hearing this, not as an attack, not as a war, but as the truth spoken by a woman who loved you completely and whom you chose, anyway, to betray, then I want you to hear this too. It is not too late to be someone different. I do not know if it is too late for us, but it is not too late to be someone different. That is the most I can offer you right now, and it is more than you gave me. to everyone else. To everyone who stayed through this entire story, who sat with me through the rosemary and the locks and the courtroom and all of it, I want to say something before you go. What happened to me can happen to anyone. It does not require weakness. It does not require confusion. It does not require being the kind of person who doesn't pay attention or doesn't ask questions or doesn't know their own mind. I am a retired school teacher who kept a notebook and hired a lawyer and had good people around her. And it still almost worked. So please, pay attention to the people you love, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with the clear-eyed, steady, present attention of someone who understands that love is not just a feeling. It is a practice. It requires showing up. It requires asking real questions and listening to real answers. It requires being the kind of person that the people in your life can call when something is wrong. Be that person. Be Theo. Be Bernadette. Be Patrice, who mails an envelope without asking questions. Be Sergeant Doucette, who listens when everyone else has already decided. Those people saved my life. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But in the steady, faithful, ordinary way that lives are actually saved. One phone call, one envelope, one cup of coffee at a kitchen table at a time. Be those people for someone. Before you go, I have a question for you. And I am directing this one not just to the people watching. I am directing it to Vivienne, and to every Vivienne who might be watching this story and seeing themselves in it. If you could go back to the beginning, to the moment before the first small move was made, before the first reasonable suggestion, before the first carefully placed seed of doubt, would you do it differently? Leave your answer in the comments. A yes or no. And if you are watching this and you are not a Vivienne but you know one, if you are someone who has been where I have been, who has stood on their own porch looking at a lock that should not be there, leave a comment and say, I'm still here too, Gloria, because you are. And that matters. If this story moved you, share it. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because somewhere right now there is a woman sitting in a borrowed bedroom in a house that is not hers, and wondering if anyone is going to believe her. Let her find this. Let her know that the truth, told clearly and without flinching, is still the most powerful thing any of us has. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Real ones. Hard ones. The kind that live in the quiet spaces between what people show the world and what is actually happening inside their homes. I am Gloria Thibodaux. I am still in my house. And Vivienne, wherever you are, the wind chime is still on the porch. Come home when you're ready to be honest.